My name is Barak Ravid. I'm the diplomatic correspondent of Haaretz. And as part of my job in the last, I think, 8 or 9 years, every year I would go to the AIPAC conference in Washington, which I think it would be an understatement to say that it's quite a different crowd. And when you go there, you know, this is not to disrespect the important work AIPAC is doing, but when you go there as an Israeli, you get the sense that Israel is on the brink of extinction, or at least an existential threat, a threat of annihilation, whatever. And because this panel will deal with a lot of security related issues, I wanted to stress a few facts just so that you'll know. Israel is not under a threat of annihilation. Okay, Israel is a regional superpower. In the radius, it's a military superpower. It's an economic superpower. I think it would be even safe to say that it's also a diplomatic superpower, especially when you compare us to other countries in the region. In the radius of 1,500 kilometers, Israel can annihilate every living organism with the press of a button. I think this is quite reassuring as an Israeli citizen. But all that does not mean that everything's peachy and that we live somewhere between Finland and Norway. We are not, obviously. It's enough to open the newspaper, open the TV, or open a map to see that there are quite big security challenges to Israel. One of them is, and this is something that we'll discuss in the next hour or so, one of them is the Iranian nuclear program that luckily is in the freezer for the at least next 10 years. But even so, Iran is a security threat with its proxies in the region. I don't want to sound too much like the Prime Minister of Israel, but you know, in some cases, sometimes he has a point. Okay, there are security challenges: Hezbollah, Hamas in Gaza, situation in Syria, ISIS, and we're going to talk about all of those issues while taking in mind that again, Israel is not under a threat of extinction, and Israel is strong. And from that point, how do we deal with all those security issues, and how is Israel going to do this together with its strongest and most important ally, the United States of America? So back to our panelists. We actually have, I think, really a distinguished panel here. Our first panelist, retired colonel and member of Knesset, Omer BarLev. If you don't know, Omer BarLev was the commander of I think the most famous and important elite unit in the IDF that's called Sayeret Matkal. I'm not sure that there's an equivalent in the US for this. Maybe the British SAS, if you heard about them. MK BarLev is a member of the Labour Party, or what's called in the last election the Zionist Union, and he's a member of the Foreign Affairs and Security Committee of the Knesset. Another panelist is Congresswoman Carolyn Maloney. She is a member of Congress since 1992. She's a senior member of the House Financial Services Committee, so we all want to be on her good side, and the House Oversight Government Reform Committee and the Joint Economic Committee. Actually, the first bill Maloney passed was the Arab Boycott Arms Sales Prohibition Act, which prohibits the US from selling arms to any nation that participates in boycotts against Israel. And I think one of the another important things that the Congresswoman did was to vote for more funding for Iron Dome system for Israel. And as a citizen of Tel Aviv that last summer watched how the Iron Dome intercepts missiles that were aimed at my house, then thank you very much for voting in favor of giving that money. Two other panelists, Both of them are government officials, one from Israel and another from the United States. First one, Jeremy Issacharoff. Some of you might recognize him from his time here as the Deputy Ambassador of Israel in Washington. Today he's the Vice Director General of the Israeli Foreign Ministry, in charge of strategic affairs, economic affairs, and international organizations. Something that you wouldn't find in Mr. Issacharoff's bio, because he's too modest to say, is that he's the #1 expert on Iran in Israel. And I can say that as someone who knows him for quite a long time. It will be interesting to hear his thoughts about this issue. And the last panelist, last but not least, Rob Malley, Special Assistant to President Obama and White House Coordinator for the Middle East and North Africa and the Gulf region. And as of the last week, right, he's the Senior Advisor to the President for the Counter-ISIS campaign. A small issue and very easy to solve. But you know, Rob is here not only for his current job, but for all of his previous work in the US government for the last, I don't know, 20 years or so. He was a member of President Clinton's national security team and part of the group of US officials that tried to promote Israeli Palestinian peace, not successfully, but unfortunately. But I think he knows Israel and the region maybe more than many other people. We'll start with you, MK BarLev. One thing that people here might not know is the fact that you were the only member of Knesset to actually support the Iran deal. How do you explain this fact? And how do you explain the fact that most of your colleagues either did not support it or didn't have the courage to say that they do support it?
How do I explain that I was the only one, or how do I explain that I supported it?
Let's go one after the other.
Okay, so first of all, regarding the supporting issue, what I said loud and clear, that the nuclear threat to Israel after the Iranian deal was signed in the next coming years will be smaller than it is today. And you're right that I was maybe the only one that said it loud and clear, and I have two explanations to that. The first one is, you know, maybe the others didn't read the
nuclear deal,
the agreement, and the small words over there. But I think the real answer, it's not exactly an answer, is that, you know, it's always nicer to be part of the warm consensus. And in Israel, when the issue is regarding national security, there is usually a consensus between the different parties. And it's nice to be there, part of the consensus, and not always pleasant to be out there alone in the cold. But in this case, I was and is familiar with not only with the agreement, but the interim agreement 2 years ago, and so on and so on.
But what was the one thing, if I can, you know, just pick one thing that when you read the deal, okay, that brought you to the conclusion that it's not a bad one?
Well, after I read the Lausanne partial agreement, if I may say so, I defined there quite a few holes. And when I read the complete agreement, I saw that some of the most important holes were closed. Of course, there are.
Give me one. What's the one thing that you read in the agreement and you said, you know what? Yeah, I can live with that.
I'll give you one. The one, once Iran will breach the agreement, what will be the procedure regarding renewing the sanctions? This was open in the Lausanne intermediate agreement, and it was closed very good. Also regarding other issues, whether Iran will try and not only develop its nuclear capabilities, also develop their capabilities to launch a nuclear bomb. So there was an issue about 24 days. Of course, 24 hours is better than 24 days, but again, a country that tries to develop a launching system and an explosive system of a nuclear atomic bomb, it is not able to erase that and eliminate that within 24 days.
Okay, Congresswoman Maloney, you voted against the deal. And you just heard what your colleague from Israel said. What was the one thing for you that made you vote against it?
Well, the whole purpose of the agreement was to keep Iran from getting nuclear weapons, and really what would make the region and the world safer. And the more I read the deal, the more I was disturbed that I didn't think it would make the region any safer, and I didn't think that it prevented them from getting nuclear weapons. And I think the actions of Iran since then have proven that. Number one, they said you could have inspections anytime, any place, and then you read it more and they can delay it for 24 days. Well, if you really thought that there was nothing wrong, you could do an inspection within an hour or allow it. And they are hoping that the region will change in the future, but the ink was not even dry before they were announcing death to America, death to Israel. And Osama bin Laden has taught us when they say they want to kill you, I believe them. And I think that you can hope for the best, but you have to, hope is not a strategy. You have to plan for the worst and do what makes you safer. Just after the deal was approved, they discovered more uranium, which is not enriched, which means they do not have to send it out. They are now in the process of enriching that, and they were caught sending weapons since they signed the deal to the Houthis in the Sudan. They've been big exporters of terror in the region with Hamas and Hezbollah, and with this deal, they're going to have billions and billions more, not only from the reserve money, but from the sale of their oil to continue their activities. And then fourthly, we were told that they would release the American hostages. We were asking, why aren't you releasing these hostages during these negotiations? Not only did they not release them, they arrested another one, convicted a reporter.
But during the time
and it's written into the agreement that they can buy conventional weapons. They've started developing anti-ballistic missiles that are only used to attack. So and I would say the arms race that has evolved since the agreement with both Qatar, the United Arab Emirates has now said that they're no longer bound by their anti-nuclear proliferation agreements, that they are going to start their nuclear program. And Saudi Arabia and Israel are all buying more arms. I don't think that makes the region any safer.
And what did you think? You said about Israel, and you remember, I guess, what happened here a few months ago when this issue, I think the Iranian deal, became, I think, it will be, let's say it mildly, quite a political issue in this country, and the Israeli Prime Minister came to Congress to speak. It was a very controversial thing. Many members of Congress and senators from your party boycotted this speech. I remember that Congresswoman, that House Minority Pelosi, House Minority Leader Pelosi said that she was on the brink of crying after his speech. What did you think about the whole debate around this and how Israel became a sort of, let's say, political football between Democrats and Republicans around the Iran deal?
Well, since I've been in Congress, the support for Israel has been deep and strong and committed. It is the only democracy in the Middle East, a strong ally.
And you don't think that what happened harmed this bipartisan support?
Well, I think that the support has been, there's scratches and in the relationship now. The support for Israel should be bipartisan and nonpartisan. And the actions became very partisan. I must tell you that when a Israeli prime minister addresses Congress, it's one of the few times that both sides are applauding and supportive. And usually when a Republican president speaks, the Republicans applaud, a Democratic president, Democrats applaud. With Israel, both sides are on their feet.
But you know,
and
I was there
Israel.
in this speech.
Yeah.
I was there in this speech, and actually both sides did not.
No,
you know, and it was quite amazing to see from the balcony, to see how one part of Congress, you know, gives the Prime Minister of Israel a standing ovation. The other part just sits there.
Well, this was the first time that the support was not united. Because
and are
Boehner,
you concerned about that?
I am very concerned. Boehner invited a foreign dignitary without involving the Democratic leadership or the President of the United States. And this was seen by many Democrats, particularly the Black and Puerto Rican caucuses, as a slight to the President of the United States. I was in a meeting that Nancy Pelosi came to after she read an announcement that she and Boehner were inviting the Prime Minister of Israel. She knew nothing about it. I have not spoken directly to Senator Feinstein about this, but it was reported that she invited the Prime Minister to come to a meeting with Democratic senators, and that they were turned down. It was the first time that leading members of the Jewish faith were not invited. And I was working to get tickets for them because they wanted to come and see it. And it's the only time I have been told I cannot attend a meeting or an event supporting Israel. I don't think Democrats were invited to any of the meetings. And it was decidedly, it became very partisan when it shouldn't have been. Support for Israel should be bipartisan. Politics should be left out of it. And to make matters worse, many Democrats felt that Prime Minister Netanyahu endorsed Romney. He appeared with him. There were ads, which he said he didn't put out, but it had his picture with him, with statements that you needed a stronger leadership than the President Obama. And so it created,
well, maybe he
I
learned
would
the
say,
lesson.
bad
He's not
feelings.
endorsing Trump now, so maybe it's he learned the lesson from
He should
2012.
stay out of it. He should stay out of it. He
Yeah,
should stay out of American politics.
But Jeremy, you're not a politician. You're a civil servant, and I guess it was this period wasn't the easiest part of your job, to try and juggle between the policy and the politics of it and stay out of the politics. But the nuclear deal is over. It's behind us. It's even the Prime Minister, I think, got it out of his system in the speech in the UN and said, "Okay."
I'm not sure it's over, Barak.
You're not sure?
Only 2 or 3 weeks ago there was a test that the Iranians launched a ballistic missile, and it's against the agreement. And I think that the agreement is over us.
I meant that for Prime Minister Netanyahu, he got it out of his system in the UN, and he's less
maybe
talking
this is
about
an outcome, because the way Netanyahu decided to confront the administration, I'm sure that it reflected the negotiations, because Israel was not in the room and not in the back room. And the second point is, okay, now looking ahead, how do we make sure that Iran doesn't breach the agreement? And the only way to make sure is that Israel and the United States will work very closely, intimately together.
Yeah, so that's exactly what I wanted to ask you, Jeremy. Do you think that after everything we've seen and witnessed around the Iran deal, and now that the Iran deal is a fact of life, what do you think Israel and the U.S., do you think that that we'll be able to go back and work together on this issue? And what do you think should be done? What do you think Israel and the U.S. should do to tackle the Iranian issue as a whole right now?
Well, I think first and foremost, the The deal, as it went through, did not leave any of the analysts with any sense of illusion that Iran had given up its nuclear program in an irrevocable way. I haven't seen any analysis that a strategic decision has been made by Iran at the highest levels to abandon its military nuclear ambitions, despite the issue of the agreement. And obviously, as we go into this period, as you've said, of the implementation, I'd say that the implementation is going to be the key sense of credibility of the agreement, and whether one can really begin to see changes in Iranian behavior. And as the member of Knesset, BarLev, has already said, we've already seen moving up towards the day of implementation, which is probably the next milestone in the implementation of the agreement. We've already seen missile tests of ballistic missiles that are capable of carrying nuclear warheads. We've seen transfers of weapons. We've seen other activities in support of terrorist groups. The activities of Iran in a regional sense have not changed. I mean, not only we have not seen a fundamental strategic change in Iran regarding its nuclear program, but not only regarding its regional policy of hegemony as well.
But
so there are still many challenges that we still have to face. Sorry?
You think that this was an expectation? That I don't think that anybody expected that after the Iran deal, all of a sudden the Iranians will join the Zionist movement and will abandon all of their negative actions in the region.
It wasn't an expectation. We know the Iranians well enough to realize that this is not something they're going to do. But the whole point of the diplomatic effort against Iran for the last 20 years that I've been dealing with it was to prevent Iran obtaining a military nuclear capability. And this objective is still ahead of us. It's not behind us. And you need to have very extensive verification of the agreement in many different aspects of it, and that's going to be one of the major challenges that will stay on, in my opinion, our national security agenda and the United States national security agenda.
You said two things: A, implementation; B, implementation and verification; and B, Iran's regional behavior. What do you think, as a senior government official that deals with exactly those issues, what do you think that Israel and the U.S. should do to tackle those two priorities?
I think they should do what they've always done, have very deep consultations on these issues. And one thing I think you should take into account, it would be very wrong, there are differences that we had on this agreement, but in fact, there are a lot of different facets of our bilateral strategic relationship that actually carried on over the last weeks and months in the most coordinated, tight way that we've always worked. Sorry?
For example?
For example, the vote in the IEA regarding Israel, the anti-Israel resolution, in which the American and Israeli delegation were pretty much like one delegation against this, on a whole range of non-proliferation issues that we deal with on a regular basis, a lot of counterterrorism activity, that we are engaged with the administration. You might have seen there have been some designations of various terrorist groups in the areas. And also you'll notice that the last recent test of the Arrow 3 is also involving a tremendous amount of extensive cooperation.
So you don't feel that there's fallout that actually harmed this cooperation, or that
I'm saying
there needs to be like this process of building trust again or something like that?
No, I'm saying that it's not as if the relationship has to be built from zero upwards. There have been differences on certain aspects, and even on those aspects we've had extensive conversations already with the administration.
Yeah.
There have been very senior visitors that have come to Israel, and we've engaged with them on these issues. Look, it's going to be a process that will carry on, and as the agreement continues, so will these consultations, and in my opinion they'll become much more deeper and much more profound.
And so coming to your colleague, Rob Malley, on this, do you think that, as Jeremy said, let's say the crisis around the Iran deal was more or less contained, and that it's possible to let's say, put it behind us and look to the future?
First, I want to thank you for inviting me, and I want to thank this extraordinary turnout. I know you heard directly from President Obama, his greetings. I want to reiterate them. It's really great to see so many people come out on a Sunday. Second, on the Iran deal, I just want to make a few points. We've already heard a robust back and forth. There has been a robust back and forth in our country, as I know there's been elsewhere. Did we expect that Iran would change its behavior in the region? No. We knew they were going to continue to chant death to America. We knew they were going to continue to launch missile tests. We knew they were going to continue to try to export weapons to terrorist groups. And we knew that we were going to have to take action, in fact, greater efforts to stop them on all those fronts and to work closely with Israel to make sure that that would happen. But if we knew they were going to do those things, and they would have done those things with a deal or no deal, President Obama's assessment, our assessment, was that we'd be much better off if they're going to chant death to America, if they want to support terrorist groups, if they want to launch missile tests, for them to do that without a nuclear weapon than with one. And that's why the president spent so much of his effort, why the administration spent so much time. I personally spent over several months negotiating with my colleagues this deal, because this deal guarantees that for the next 10 years, Iran will not get a bomb, or if it tries to get a bomb, we will have 1 year as opposed to a few weeks to stop them from getting it.
But if we look to the future, and now with your new role as the coordinator or the special Omer for the counter-ISIS campaign, in a way, I mean, the ISIS phenomena is huge, but you can see parts of the issues that were debated during the Iran deal. Okay, especially Iran's regional behavior, or the whole question of whether Iran is part of the solution in the region or part of the problem in the region. All of those questions are very relevant regarding the future solution in Syria and the fight against ISIS. And I guess that what a lot of people are trying to understand is, if for this administration right now, when it comes to fighting ISIS, is Iran part of the problem or part of the solution?
So when I come to my third point is your question, which is, does it leave, is this behind us? Well, as Jeremy said, even while it was with us, we worked very closely. Great security cooperation. I think it's fair to say that this president has done more for Israel's security, or as much for Israel's security, as any of his predecessors. I think, and as we speak, we're negotiating a memorandum of understanding with Israel to enshrine our level of assistance, higher level of assistance for the next 10 years. And on intelligence share, security cooperation.
Let me just get in here. Do you think that this memorandum of understanding will be signed when Barack Obama is still the president of the United States?
I certainly anticipate that. So I think we're going to see...
And Congresswoman, do you think that Congress is going to approve this memorandum of understanding and fund it? It's, at the end of the day, we're talking about something between $40 to $50 billion.
Well, you can't comment on something you haven't seen. So you have to see what the document is before you can comment on it. Right now, President Obama, many of his initiatives, which I support, have been thwarted by the Republican majority in the House and the Senate. And it depends. If I had to guess, I would think the Republicans would probably just oppose it. They seem to oppose everything that President Obama wants to do.
Republicans will oppose
maybe not,
memorandum
maybe
of
not.
understanding of
Take
security of
gun
Israel.
Safety.
This
take
will
gun
be news.
Safety.
This will be news. But again, going back to the question on.
I hope it is signed before President Obama leaves office, but nothing's ever certain.
So going back to the question about Iran's role in the fight against ISIS.
But first I want to say, so we've continued, and I do not think that this is going to leave, and that we're going to see any impact of the debate, the very robust debate about Iran, have any impact on the future of our cooperation with Israel. And I think, as I said, we're seeing evidence of it going on now. We have differences. We had differences on Iran. Two issues, at least, on which we've had differences: Iran and the peace process, about which we may speak about later. But those differences have done nothing to dent the security relationship between the two countries. In fact, as I said, President Obama is committed to do everything in his power to protect Israel's security so that it's able to defend itself by itself against all enemies. Now, in terms of working together, in terms of the threats that we confront now, whether it's the threats from Iran that we spoke about, or the major threat that we face today, which is the threat of ISIS. Again, we are already working closely with Israel in terms of intelligence sharing, in terms of security cooperation, to make sure that we are in sync and prepared to defend against any of the threats that ISIL presents. It is the major threat today in the region. It's what the president spends most of his time focused on in the Middle East, is how can we defeat ISIL? How could we make sure that it doesn't threaten the stability of our allies, the security of our allies, or the security of the American people? And I think on that we're going to find a lot of common ground with Israel. Obviously, we're in different situations. But we have a coalition of 65 countries with which we're working to take the lead in trying to defeat ISIL. But we work bilaterally very closely with Israel, as Israel does with other countries, to make sure, number one, that Israel's security is protected, but also that we work together in terms of our intelligence sharing and security cooperation.
But you know, the Israeli government says, or the prime minister, I heard him say that during the last trip to the US, said a few times, he said, listen, when it comes to fighting ISIS, it's not whether you fight one side, which is ISIS, and then strengthen the other side, which is Assad and Iran. It's about weakening both. And that's the question. I mean, does this administration see Iran and its allies in Syria as part of the solution when it comes to fighting ISIS?
Of course, today, part of the problem are the allies of the Assad regime, which are acting in a way which we are convinced is delaying the formation of a broad coalition of Syrians, first and foremost, but also of the international community against ISIS. Because as long as you have a regime that is as divisive and as brutal as the one you have now, it is hard to see how all Syrians could come together and fight against what should be their common enemy. So we're going to continue to oppose, to have very sharp differences with those countries that support the regime. Ultimately, and that's why it was so important for Secretary Kerry for his efforts to get Iran at the table, to get Russia, Iran, Saudi Arabia, Turkey, and all other countries, roughly 20 countries, at the table to negotiate a diplomatic solution, to help forge a diplomatic solution to Syria, is that it's precisely because Iran and Russia are on the wrong side of this equation that they have to be part of the ultimate outcome, because we could talk among like-minded countries for as long as we want. If we don't get Russia and Iran to change their behavior, this war is going to go on with catastrophic implications for Syrians, for the daily lives of Syrians, for children, for refugees, for the region, and for us, because it does mean, as I said, making it more difficult, not impossible, but more difficult to fight ISIS.
Yeah, MK BarLev wanted to come
in. You know, there's the old saying that says, the enemy of your enemy is your friend. I think what happens in Syria, and refers to your question regarding Iran, I think this is one of the unique cases that the enemy of your enemy is not your friend. Because from an Israeli point of view, the question is not whether Assad or ISIS will be on our borders. The question is whether it will be ISIS, Al-Qaeda, Hezbollah, Iran. I don't see Assad getting control over the southern part of Syria and the Golan Heights. So from our point of view, it's much more, not much. It's complicated from the US point of view as well, but it's very complicated to understand what do we prefer. Do we prefer to see Al-Qaeda and Jabhat al-Nusra on our borders, or do we prefer maybe to see Hezbollah on our border with Syria, because it's better to see them than Al-Qaeda there. Yeah,
so
Jeremy, from our point of view, just to end this, from our point of view, it's very difficult to see what is good for Israel. And from this point of view, I think maybe one of the few areas that I agree with Netanyahu's approach towards our relation, how do we react regarding what is going on with Syria. I think trying not to be involved there, this is the best thing and the best way that Israel should act.
Yeah, but so Jeremy, what is Israel's preference when it comes to Syria? Because sometimes I feel that the government policy is like the former Prime Minister Begin said during the Iran-Iraq war, that we wish success to both sides.
I think actually our policy on Syria has actually been very clear. First of all, we know very clearly what we don't want, and I'm not sure that many people can actually come and give you a realistic outlay of their policy of what they actually do want and can be achieved. But we know what we don't want. And we don't want the Golan Heights, which before this civil war was our quietest border for over 40 years. We don't want this already complicated situation in Syria destabilizing the border even more and becoming some sort of jumping off point for the Iranians as well. Not only have the Russians increased their presence in Syria, but also the Iranians did as well. From that point of view, our position on that is, we want a stable, secure border without any type of threat to us. And if we see a threat emanating, we'll have to deal with it. Second of all, we've made very clear we don't countenance any transfer of sophisticated conventional weapons coming from the Syrian army, which is being supplied generally by the Russians, and also the transfer of Iranian weapons and systems to Hezbollah as well on Syrian soil. Third thing is the issue of chemical weapons. We're still concerned that Assad has maintained various chemical capabilities, even though the agreement with Russia and America did remove a massive amount of 1,300 tons.
You have information that Assad still holds an operational amount of chemical weapons?
We do not exclude that. And we also see the fact that Daesh has also been using mustard gas, not only in Syria but also in Iraq. So these three issues are very much on our agenda, and that very much informs our policy relating to Syria. And how the wider and broader conflict plays itself out is something that obviously we're monitoring and watching very closely. But I think, at this point, to say you have a preference for this course of action or not is obviously we'd want a Western, moderate, democratic government in Syria, but this is obviously not going to happen.
Yeah.
So, we have to go with the choices that are there, and they're all pretty bad choices.
Yeah. Congresswoman Maloney, the Iran deal was a very politicized issue in this country, and ISIS tops it by a lot. I mean, you open the television these days, and it seems like, ISIS is on the brink of landing here in New York City. But obviously there are a lot of people in this country that are not satisfied with how the administration is dealing with this issue. What's your take on this?
Well, I support President Obama and Secretary Kerry. I feel that their approach of trying to get a coalition to combat and using special forces, which our friend here was a leader in Israel, to combat on the ground, advising is very important, but really insisting that the countries in the region take some responsibility for their own protection and encouraging them to do so. And it was in the paper, I think yesterday or day before, that Iraq is making some gains, and the Kurds, I would arm the Kurds more, and they seem to be successful in what they're trying to do. And I think that it has to be a coalition effort. Everyone has a responsibility. Protecting our citizens is our #1 responsibility, and we are all concerned about the security of Israel too. And we need to cut off their money. We need to cut off their oil. We need to surround them. We need to destroy them. And we need to work as a unit together to make that happen. We also, after 9/11, as you know, totally revamped our whole intelligence system, working closely with Israel and our other allies. We completely rearranged our government. It was the biggest reorganization since 1947, and according to the intelligence community, we've been successful in thwarting so far efforts to harm us, but we're deeply concerned about the security of Israel too, and we need a united front, and I think the President and Secretary Kerry are doing a good job, quite frankly.
So Rob, but here I want to go back to you. Jeremy Issacharoff didn't say it, but the Israeli Minister of Defense said it last week at the Saban Forum in Washington, and he was asked what he thinks about the way, about U.S. policy in Syria and on ISIS, and he said quite a harsh thing, actually. He said that the U.S. is sitting on the fence. Do you think you're sitting on the fence?
No, I'm not sure what fence he's referring to, but I think we've been more active than any other country from the beginning in going after ISIS. As the Congresswoman said, putting together a coalition, but even beyond that, having our own airstrikes before anyone else, going after ISIS in Iraq and in Syria. This last month has been the month of the most intensive airstrikes that we've seen, going after and killing some of their key leaders. But we also know, and this is where I think people in this room who remember the last 10 years, that going in there massively on our own, without partners on the ground, is not just, we won't win in any lasting way. It will be at great expense for us when what we need are forces on the ground who have the ability not just to win with our help, but to hold the ground afterwards. Otherwise, who's going to hold it? Either nobody, in which case it's vacuum and chaos, and the next ISIL will spring out of those ashes, or it's going to be US forces. And again, I think we learned the harsh lessons of Iraq and Afghanistan. That's not the way to do it. So we need to work with forces in Iraq and in Syria, and it's taking longer in Syria because obviously we don't have a government with which we can work. But we want to identify, train, equip forces in both those countries that can take the fight with our help, with our airstrikes, and now with our special forces, because the more we identify friendly forces on the ground, the more we could help them with the special forces that will act as a force multiplier. But even that's not enough. We have to act, again, as a congressman said, to stem the flow of foreign fighters, which we've been doing, and now we could do even more aggressively because Europeans and other countries, given what happened in Paris, are more awakened to the urgency of the task. We need to cut off the financial flows, which we're doing not only internationally, but also on the ground by going after the oil tankers, by going after what gives ISIS its resources. And we also have to have a counter-messaging campaign, which can't really be led by the US because we won't be the most credible voices in the region, but we need voices in the region, and we can help them and we can amplify them to go after this pernicious and noxious ideology. So we have, with 65 countries as part of the coalition, under our leadership, military campaign, a campaign to get forces on the ground, a campaign to stop the flow of fighters, to stop the flow of money, and also a campaign to lead the diplomatic task, because as I said earlier, unless you resolve the conflict in Syria, you're not going to be able to have the kind of coalition and concerted effort by Syrians against ISIS. You're going to have the regime.
We have a very short time, so I just want to...
But just one more thing. Of course, part of our effort is also protecting the homeland, and that's what President Obama spoke about last week, and will continue, of course, to focus on that.
Omer, you want a very short comment? Because I want to get one last question. So
yes, from a professional point of view, I can say that it's very complicated. And I agree with Rob. There is one question, how to cut the financial support that ISIS gets from their oil and so on and so on. And this, from an operational point of view, is relatively easy. The harder question is, okay, once this, the US, France, and so on will succeed with that, how to get to a situation that there won't be a vacuum there. And for this, you need the coalition. But without, and you don't have to conquer all the Islamic State. Let's not forget, we are talking about an Islamic State. There is a state there. They don't have a representative in the UN, but there is a state there. And the way to, from an operational point of view, relatively easy, and relatively easy is still hard, is to take control of their oil capabilities, which brings them the financial support that support all their terror operations.
We're running out of time. I just want to make one last question to you, Rob. Because there's a lot of, most of the issues that were dealt with in this conference until now were the Israeli-Palestinian peace process. And some people say, or some people, and the Prime Minister of Israel, many others said, everything that goes on with ISIS shows you that the Israeli-Palestinian conflict has nothing to do with the problems in the Middle East. Other people will tell you, listen, peace between Israel, as Barak said, the solution for ISIS, or one of the solutions, is two-state solution. Who do you think is more right? The Prime Minister says that it's got nothing to do, or Barak says it's got everything to do?
Listen, this question's been around for a long time. First it was with Al-Qaeda, now ISIS, and it will keep coming around. it is clear. It's not, by solving the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, you're not going to make ISIS go away. You're not going to make all the other problems of the region go away. I think it would be an absurdity intellectually to argue that. By the same token, if you were to resolve the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, not only would, in our view, would it strengthen Israel's security, would it strengthen its capacity to continue as a Jewish democratic state, not only would it give the Palestinians the rights they deserve, it would also make possible the kind of cooperation between Arab countries and Israel that would allow them to focus on the question of ISIS, and it would take away one of the arguments that some extremists use, which is to refer constantly to that conflict. So
you think that such cooperation between Israel and Arab states, the cooperation you're talking about, is impossible without some sort of progress?
It's not impossible, and things can already happen, but the kind of open cooperation that would really lead to changes on the ground, I think that's going to be very difficult for political reasons that I think everyone in this room understands, for a country like Saudi Arabia, for a country like any other country, to decide they're going to openly cooperate with Israel. I think Jeremy knows that well. But so, of course, it would be, there are many reasons to solve the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, which, again, I don't need to repeat to this room. But one of the reasons is that it would help diffuse an issue that is fueling extremism, and it would help that kind of cooperation. But I would be the last person to say that this is the magic wand that would put an end to all of the problems that have been that have been plaguing the Middle East.
But are you concerned that we saw, Omer said that it's a state, but we saw this state in Iraq, then in Syria, then in Sinai, then in Libya. Are you concerned that the next stop will be the West Bank or Gaza?
I don't know where the next stop will be, but I think there's a more basic point, which is the absence of a resolution is fueling extremism. I think that's, you go to Gaza, that's self-evident. Whether ISIS is going to have a foothold there, whether it's starting to try to do that in Gaza, that's a separate question. But I think that it stands to reason that resolving this conflict would at least help. It wouldn't resolve, but it would be a major contribution towards stemming the rise of extremism and towards allowing the kind of cooperation that is needed to confront what should be a common challenge, which is a challenge of ISIS and of other extremist organizations.
I guess that we could have continued this discussion for another few hours. It was fascinating, but there are other people that want to conquer this stage, and we'll let them. So thanks a lot for our panelists. Thank you for being here. Thank you.